University, and as I said before, John's neighbor in Kaohsiung. It's great to see you, Mark.
Yeah, it's wonderful. Thank you so much, Scott. I was going to show a website, but this doesn't seem to be, we'll just, we don't need to use the pickle. But okay, well.
If you look here, if you can look one eye.
Oh, I see, okay. Oh, it's
fixed there.
All right, I will just, if anybody has any questions for Joe, I actually think, because I'll just take a minute to find this website, so just in the interest of time, keep the conversation going.
Last slide up to 50% with software division. Was that across all fields?
I think it was the same measure. As I understood it, was the same, using the same assumptions. So this is cross field.
It's in general very
Which is scary high, right?
yeah.
About how like GPT plus training affects the outputs as that seeming paradox. To me, that tells me that even when you tell somebody that these are some pitfalls to pay attention to, it's still easy to ignore them. Whereas the positive training about how to more efficiently use GPT would probably stick more.
Yeah, they said in the training a lot of it was writing good prompts. So maybe they were a little over-focused on just getting good prompts and maybe not enough. I don't know the exact content of the training.
Yeah.
Maybe they should have been more, you better double check.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Scott, for inviting me to speak here today. And Joe, that was an amazing presentation. I will absolutely not be able to top that in any way. But it's an honor to be here, and I'm really here more to learn from you all than anything. I teach at National Yat-sen University in Kaohsiung, and I am the director of the Humanities Center there. I've taught there for 6 years. I'm a professor in the Chinese literature department, so I study modern Chinese literature and intellectual thought, Taiwanese literature, and I thought I'd start my presentation today just, first of all, by introducing some of the things we're doing down in Kaohsiung. And this links a little bit to the digital world that we're trying to all figure out how to live within. But about 3 years ago, the Ministry of Education, under, of course, the DPP's leadership and guidance, they have put a lot of emphasis on internationalization, particularly in the south of Taiwan. There's a notion that Taipei has been treated too well for far too long in terms of educational resources and in terms of building the capacity to create a kind of international, cosmopolitan, intellectual and urban center. So they want Kaohsiung to become a global city, right? So we were encouraged to develop programming around globalization, around internationalization, and how do you do that in a Chinese literature department, which is historically in Taiwan, of course, has always been based around mostly, predominantly classical Chinese, the Confucian classics, the full run of the 2,000 years of Chinese tradition. So it's typically been considered the most traditional 5,000 years. Yes, it could be traced back. We might be 20,000 years, but it's always been typically considered the most traditional of all the humanities departments in Taiwan, right? For both methodological, pedagogical, but also political reasons as well, and it is connected to some kind of Chinese consciousness. Most of the Chinese departments were founded at a time when the ROC on Taiwan was to represent the Orthodox Chinese state, the real China, the true China. And so how do you modernize a department like the Chinese literature department? And how do you get the entire field to try to respond to Taiwanese society as well as global concerns? So anyways, we launched this Global Sinology Forum at National Yat-sen University, and I just wanted to kind of share with you all. And of course, as you all know, being a professor now in Taiwan, it's research, teaching, and admin, that's just the basics, right? That's no longer really I mean, that's just the core of what we do, but that's just considered average, right? If you really want to get big funding from the Ministry of Education or from the Ministry of Science, you have to do these big projects, right? So reaching out internationally, building programs, building platforms, engaging. And of course, what does that mean? That means doing a lot of academic events, bringing foreigners and other scholars from all over the world to a place like Kaohsiung, and then putting it up on YouTube, right? That's your evidence of your engagement, right? So anyways, this is not what I'm going to talk about predominantly today, but I thought I'd share it with you as a jumping off point. And as we've done about 3 years of our forum, we've put on many events, but as we've done transcultural trunks, we've done Cold War in literature, and as we do our events, we're always just posting them on YouTube, right, and Facebook. And this is how the Ministry of Education judges your so-called social impact, right? It's how many clicks you can have, how many people digitally can come to your events. And so I always think to myself, in some ways we're just enriching Google or enriching these big tech companies by using public funds to put on these events. I hope they're more meaningful than that, but it shows you that if the humanities, right, is, at least in the current system in Taiwan, is to meet the internationalization demands of the current government, you have to engage with digital technologies, right? You have to show you have digital presence. It's not just enough, right, to go to your class 3 times a week, teach, engage with your students, and then go home. You now have to be digital. You now have to be, and the digital is some kind of marker of your attempt to engage with the global world, which I'm sure all of you know. So anyways, moving on to the core of what I want to talk about today. So obviously, we're all trying to figure out, how do we teach, how do we prepare students for the many disruptions that Joe just shared with us. And as a humanist, someone who studies the history of modern Chinese literature, I don't have any answers to how we should approach ChatGPT. I do have some thoughts, but I wanted to take us back to this concept that was the title of my talk, to the post-human age. Okay, so some philosophers, some people have said we're already in an age defined by that could be described as post-human or post-humanist. And what does that mean? How do we think about that? And today I want to talk about 3 moments of post-humanism, if you will. 3 moments in which thinkers and writers already sensed, actually well before the explosion of AI over the last couple of years, but already a sense that we were leaving an analog world and what that meant. And so the 3 moments I'm going to talk about, the first moment is, I'm going to talk about the writer Philip Roth, who you may know, one of the great American writers, wrote very powerfully and poignantly about Jewish American identity. And as early as the year 2000, Roth predicted the death of literature. That literature, as we knew it growing up, I think most of us here likely grew up before the internet, in an age before the internet. I was born in the early 80s, so I still have a very, very strong and powerful memory of a pre-digital era, right? A relatively pre-digital era. I mean, there was no computer in the house, there was certainly no internet. We had analog books, we had books that you held in your hands. We had the Encyclopedia Britannica. That was our world. And Roth, in the year 2000, said this. Every year, this was the year 2000, every year 70 readers die and only 2 are replaced. That's a very easy way to visualize it. By readers, he said, he means people who read serious books seriously and consistently. The evidence, quote, and this is Roth, the evidence is everywhere that the literary era has come to an end. The evidence is the culture. The evidence is the society. The evidence is the screen. The progression from the movie screen to the television screen to the computer. There's only so much time, so much room, and there are only so many habits of mind that can determine how people use the free time they have. Literature takes a habit of mind that has disappeared. It requires silence, some form of isolation, and sustained concentration in the presence of an enigmatic thing. It is difficult to come to grips with a mature, intelligent, adult novel. It is difficult to know what to make of literature. That's why I say stupid things are said about it, because unless people are well trained, they don't know quite what to make of it. Now, putting aside, of course, Roth's literary elitism, I think this notion of the age of the screen, the domination of the screen, the way in which the written word the analog mode of engaging with the written word as a kind of physical object you hold in your hand that was linked to a habit of mind, that required time, patience, isolation, sustained, that could allow for some kind of sustained concentration. That, of course, is gone. This is, of course, not telling you anything new, but that now we live mediated in some fundamental way by these machines. We can never go back to this analog world. And in the 3 examples I'm going to talk about today, there's this theme in all of them, that there's this desire to return, right, to the pre-analog age, the age of silence, of concentration, of a mature, intelligent engagement with the world of literature. And here, of course, you could talk about painting, you could talk about philosophy, you could talk about any of the of the dominant arts and practices of the humanities before the age of the screen. And of course, this has great impact on how we live our lives and how we think about what the humanities are. Roth went further in his diagnosis, and he said, "You want me to go further? All right, you want to know? All right." This was, of course, an interview that he gave. Well, I think that the whole effort of certainly the first half of the 20th century, the whole intellectual and artistic effort was to see behind things, and that is no longer of interest. To explore consciousness was the great mission of the first half of the century. Whether we're talking about Freud or Joyce, whether we're talking about the Surrealists or Kafka or Marx, or Fraser or Proust or whoever, the whole effort was to expand our sense of what consciousness is and what lies behind it. It's no longer of interest. I think that what we're seeing is the narrowing of consciousness. And then he'll go on to talk about how, of course, literature is really only interesting now for either who's a bestseller, who made the most money, or the scandals around a writer. But this kind of this desire to explore consciousness, to expand consciousness, to see behind surface. I mean, this is a typical kind of anti-modern or anti-technology stance, right? That technology is superficial, that it's ultimately kind of it represents a narrowing of consciousness. Okay, so this was all the way back in 1990. I think now, whether we're talking about ChatGPT or Facebook or Instagram, I mean, the domination of the screen that Roth was worried about has only increased, 20-fold, right? And so the first question I want to put on the table through Roth is, can we concentrate anymore? Is that even possible? I mean, I find myself, and I see we're recording this today, but we're in a room of educators. I mean, when teaching in a literature department, and I teach intro to literary theory, I teach, modern Chinese literature, and I'm telling my students, put your phones away, create reading time. We actually map out reading time in the weeks for them. And I do this exercise where I introduce them to various parks around Kaohsiung, and I have them go to these parks and read on a Saturday afternoon where they have no classes, they have no pressure, they can, and I encourage them to put the phone away and see what that experience is like. But of course, this is, you're trying to artificially manufacture a pre-digital environment for them to engage on the basis that perhaps this will help them. And of course, what they say is they're just addicted to their phones, and it's a constant battle to even get them to do that. So this is the first question, right? Which is, if we're thinking in the long history of the humanities, these non-digital or non-cyborg arts, if you will, can they even speak anymore, right? Literature, to really read a novel, a 300-page novel from start to finish, requires a tremendous amount of training, concentration, effort, imagination. And so this is the first question, right? That Roth, I think through Roth we can think about. Now the second moment in time is, if we think about this this relationship that humanists have had, a relationship of opposition to technology, this deep fear, deep suspicion, as Joe mentioned, that sort of erode what it means to be human, or what does it even mean to be human? What is the value of humanity? Humanists, well before Roth had this deep fear. So I want to take us back to another writer. In the early 20th century, of course, the great writer Ian Forster also interestingly expressed similar sentiments that Roth did. But he didn't, of course, express it in relation to computer. If you read Howard's End, there's these fascinating passages about cars, about automobiles. He talks about the experience of getting into a car as just wildly disruptive of one's sense of consciousness, wildly disruptive of one's sense of time and space. And of course, for Forster, he idealized this kind of English, rural, pastoral society. And of course, Howard's End is this novel about, in some ways, the way in which industrial capitalism, the nouveau riche, the mechanisms and materialities of industrial capitalism kind of invade this pastoral space. And Howard's End is the symbol. There's a famous passage about a tree, and it overlooks this garden, and the England that he idolized was this organic, natural world of seasonal rhythm, etc. So I want to just read a passage about from Howard's End about the automobile, because in some sense it's very similar to what when we have humanists critique technology. It's a very similar emotion. So there's a very famous scene in Howard's End. The novel is about two families, the Schlegel family and the Wilcox. And the Wilcox are kind of the capitalists. They've invested in the empire, and the Schlegels are also this wealthy family, but they have literary and humanist critiques of modernity. And then, of course, there's going to be all kinds of hijinks and relationships between them. But there's this famous scene where Charles Wilcox, the son of the capitalist family, comes to pick up Helen Schlegel, one of the main characters, and he drives her in a car. And I'll just read the passage. So Charles turned around in his seat and contemplated the cloud of dust that they had raised in their passage through the village, because they'd driven through the village. It was settling again, but not all into the road from which he had taken it. Some of it had percolated through the open windows. Some had whitened the roses and gooseberries of the wayside gardens, while a certain proportion had entered the lungs of the villagers. I wonder when they'll learn wisdom and tar the roads, was his comment. So the representative from the capitalist family, Wilcox, he says, they got to tar these roads. We're driving hicks of all these dust. But of course, Schlegel, the Helen, she sees the automobile as it produces this pollution against the lungs of the villagers, the gooseberries, the roses. It's this invasive force that Forster wants to say just no to, right? So whether it's Roth in relation to the screen, or whether it's Forster 90 years before in relation to the automobile, we see this consistent desire from the humanities to run away from technology, right? As Joe said, to not look, mentioned how Joe mentioned this, become a good user of technology. Become a centaur or a cyborg, become someone who knows how to mobilize this. But it's interesting, in the humanities, in these, at least in the two examples I've given, there is this deep desire to turn back the clock, right? And just in case these examples are too Eurocentric, British and American novelists, I want to take you to modern China. And interestingly, in modern China, during the May 4th period, a little after the May 4th, so May 4th, typically new culture in 1915, 1919, May 4th erupts in 1919, and there's a lesser known debate that emerged in 1923 called the Science and Life View debate. It's like a 科学与玄学, it was a 科学与人生观的论战. And this was an interesting, very, very interesting debate in which a number of young Chinese intellectuals who had returned from Germany, returned from Europe, people like Jiang Junmai, Cai Yuanpei, they wrote in critique of what they said was this ideology of scientism, this ideology that science could solve all human issues, all human problems, and they said science had to be accompanied by so-called 人生观, a view of life. Science alone, no matter how technologically sophisticated or powerful it could be used to solve material problems, if there wasn't some kind of sense of moral cultivation behind it, they worried. They raised many of the same concerns that we hear today, that science would come to dominate human life, that machines would come to dominate human life, that humanity themselves, humans themselves would be replaced. And so in 1923, Jiang Junmai wrote an article, a very critical article, basically, again, from this kind of anti-modern stance, saying, well, whatever happens with the material transformations of modernity, we have to hold on to something human. We have to hold on to something human. It's what Roth was worried about with the screen, what Forrester's worried about the car, that our consciousness, our sense of time and place, all will be disrupted. So I just want to quote from Zheng Junmai. And by the way, Zheng Junmai would later go on to write the first draft of the Constitution of the ROC. He had a very complicated political and cultural career. But Zheng Junmai in 1924, this is what he said about science. So, however advanced science is, it is by no means capable of solving the problems of life, which hinge on nothing but human beings themselves. The so-called great thinkers since ancient times are those who contributed to our life view, from Confucius and Mencius to advocates of the philosophy of universal order during the Song, Yuan, and Ming dynasties, all emphasize the cultivation of inner life. This trends lead to a spiritual civilization. Europe, for the past 300 years, on the other hand, emphasizes the domination of nature by human power. That results in a material civilization. And of course, so this was a refrain that was heard often in the early 20th century in China by not just Zheng Junmai, but also people like Liang Shuming, who was a very famous new Confucian philosopher who was the teacher of Mo Zhongshan. And Mo Zhongshan, after 1949, came to Taiwan and was a formative figure in the development of Chinese literature departments all throughout Taiwan. A really towering intellectual figure. And so in some ways, Chinese literature departments have been influenced deeply by this notion that education, come what may, has to, quote, be about the cultivation of inner life, right? That there's something of value in the 3,000 or 5,000 years of Chinese tradition. Why read Confucius today? Why read Mencius? Forget about, Zhu Xi or Wang Yangming. That it has to do about something with spirit. And of course, it contrasts this with Europe, which is mechanistic and materialistic. But the point here is that even in China in the early 20th century, we actually have very much the same sentiments that we find in Forrester, right? People operating from literary, philosophical perspectives who are afraid, who are deeply, deeply afraid that some kind of profound hollowing out of our inner life is taking place. And so these are three moments of, I think, humanist concern in regards to the whole question of a technological modernity. And I want to finish today by speaking a little bit about the way in which all three of these examples I've given, whether it's the early 20th century Confucian philosophers worried about the loss of human spirit, or about Philip Roth saying nobody's going to read literature, we're all just going to be dominated by screens, or Ian Forster, railing against the motor vehicle. In some ways, all of these humanist calls for resistance, if you will, against the domination of technology, they all seem quite quaint today, right? As Joe's presentation, I think, perfectly encapsulated, the situation we are facing now is even, well far beyond just the question of, well, is anybody going to read books? Or, our gardens going to be polluted by dust? I mean, we are really facing a fundamental transformation in forms of labor, perhaps building on earlier transformations in forms of consciousness. And I'll just finish by quoting the economist Robert Reich, who you all may know. He was the Secretary of Labor under Clinton, and he writes often in The Guardian, and he's written quite persuasively about OpenAI and ChatGPT. And as we all know, there was a big battle on OpenAI's board over the last number of weeks. And Reich, I don't know, I mean, some of you might are probably already very knowledgeable about what happened, but Reich has an interesting article in which he says, first of all, the question of ChatGPT, ChatGPT achieves the holy grail of tech, an at-scale consumer platform that would generate billions of dollars in profits. And so this is what's at stake, right? And he goes on to talk about how Microsoft has invested $13 billion in OpenAI since 2019, and Microsoft wants a huge return on this investment. And as I understand the battle over what happened on their board over the last number of months was that originally in 2015, the governing structure of OpenAI was a non-profit, right? It was formed as a non-profit where, quote, you would have a limit on how much profit could flow to the investors. And the board was made up of, quote, ethicists and specialists in the potential downsides of AI, right? So to try to set some kind of ethical concern within the company to limit just massive marketization in the pursuit of profit immediately, right? But of course, as Wright puts it, the potential to reach this holy grail has, I guess, apparently become a very powerful incentive. So Sam Altman, the CEO, wanted to expand quicker, faster. So did the backers at Microsoft. And last week, quote, OpenAI's nonprofit board pushed Altman out, presumably over fears that he was bending too far toward Microsoft's goal of making money, while giving inadequate attention to the threats posed by AI. Where did Altman go after being fired? To Microsoft, of course. And what of OpenAI's more than 700 employees, its precious talent pool? Even if we assume they're concerned about safety, they own stock in the company and will make a boatload of money if OpenAI prioritizes growth over safety. It is estimated that OpenAI could be worth between 80 billion to 90 billion in a tender offer, making it one of the world's most valuable tech startups of all time. So it came as no surprise that almost all of OpenAI's employees signed a letter earlier this week telling the board that they would follow Altman to Microsoft if the board didn't restate Altman as CEO. And presto, on Tuesday, OpenAI's board reinstated Altman as chief executive and agreed to overhaul itself, jettisoning board members who had opposed him and adding two who seemed happy to do Microsoft's bidding: Brett Taylor, an early Facebook officer, and Lawrence Summer, the former head of Harvard and former Treasury Secretary. And so according to Robert Reich, OpenAI is sacrificing effective governance for, quote, making gobs of money. And so, all of which is to say, the drive to scale up AI, the impact it's going to have on automation and the replacement of all kinds of industries, this is really a question of the economic incentives involved here, right? And so I think Joe has said, if in a capitalist society, if something is cheaper, faster, safer, and easier, it's going to replace traditional forms of labor. And it doesn't seem as if there are any mechanisms by which we can really regulate it. The article by Reich ends with a hope. The question for the future is whether the government can do a better job of weighing the potential benefits of AI against its potential horrors. And, quote, and his final sentence, regulate this monster. But, I mean, what can government do? And I'll just finish by, we're all, I guess Ming is a private university, but as a government employee of the Ministry of, of Zhongshan Dashi in the Republic of China on Taiwan, I can tell you the hope that a university, for example, can regulate this. I mean, I'm the head of the Humanities Institute, so I'm actually technically an officer at the university. So I've had these meetings, I've sat in these meetings, and there is absolutely no consensus about what to do about ChatGPT. Certain professors are convinced that this can transform education, and they have no problem with allowing students to use it. Others, mostly the humanists, are utterly terrified. They want to ban it. I tell them, well, we still have the paper and pen test. I mean, if you're worried that they're going to write papers and it's just going to be, the AI generated, I mean, we still have the final exams. You can put them in a room and go full analog, right? But it's chaos at the moment. I mean, there's no, at least internally, I don't know if this is going to be posted online, but maybe we can. There seems to be no consensus amongst faculty, amongst administrators. I don't know if there's been any guidelines from the Ministry of Education. And the question is, of course, if, as Robert Reich hopes, his hope is the government can regulate it, but how? In what way? even if at the university level we said, well, we're going to, this is like a form of plagiarism, or this is plagiarism if you use this. How do we track it? I mean, we have 60 students per class. I mean, how, unless you have some kind of good nose, and then how do you prove it? And that would involve all kinds of litigation between students. And so, in some ways, it's like the car, the Ian Forster car, right? It's very confusing and chaotic, and it disrupts all of our sense of time and space or pedagogy. But eventually, people did find, learn to live with vehicular transportation, or people learn to live with IG and Instagram and a screen, and we're just going to have to learn. So I think Joe's point about adapting, becoming good AI users, however much, maybe for those of us who were born before Gen Z, however much our instincts is to run away from this stuff, to go to Young Ming and grab a book and just sit and drink tea and get, there's really no return. There's no return. So if we accept Reich at his word that the lure of ever greater profits means that private enterprise, quote, cannot be relied on to police itself against the horrors that an unfettered AI will create. If private enterprise can't regulate itself in government, or private enterprise should quite frankly not be expected to regulate itself. I mean, there's too much money involved. And if government is quite frankly uncertain or lacks the tools to do so, the only option is adaptation, right? And so I really thank Scott for putting on this wonderful forum to help us learn how to adapt. I think maybe next year we can do something in Kaohsiung and keep the dialogue going. And so I'll stop there, and I really I'm excited just to learn from you all about how you are adapting. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark. I'm not quite sure what to make.